A woman sits alone in her bedroom at night, her phone screen glowing faintly in the dark. She scrolls through old messages she can't delete, searching for some trace of the man who once promised her forever but vanished as though she never mattered. Her chest feels tight. Her hands tremble slightly as if her body remembers something her mind tries to forget. This is not just about him. This is grief, ancient, layered, and haunting. It is the ache of every moment she was unseen, every time she was told her voice was too much or her needs were too heavy. It is the body remembering what the soul has tried to bury. Heavy, isn't it? Grief has a way of entering silently, yet when it arrives it fills every corner of a life. It is not only the loss of people or relationships. It is the loss of dreams that never came to pass, the loss of innocence, the loss of a self that once believed love was simple and safety was guaranteed. And in this silence, the feminine carries a unique weight. She is told to smile, to keep going, to not make it about her pain. Yet beneath the surface, grief swells like a tide pressing against the shore, demanding to be felt. The body holds it long after the mind insists it has moved on. Shoulders stiffen, breath shortens, sleep turns restless. Carl Jung wrote of the shadow, the unclaimed parts of the psyche that live in the dark, influencing every choice while pretending to stay invisible. Grief is one of those shadows. It hides in the corners of a woman's laughter, in the way she tenses when someone leaves, in the hesitation before she trusts again. Left unattended, it becomes a silent ruler, shaping her relationships and her sense of worth. Yet there is another side. Grief, when faced fully, becomes a doorway. It is not a punishment but an initiation. It strips away illusion, dismantles the false self, and points toward the sovereignty that lies beyond despair. There is a paradox here. The very thing she runs from is the path she longs for. To enter grief is to enter the underworld, to walk through the ashes of what has been lost and find what cannot be taken. Myths across time have always known this truth. Persephone was pulled into darkness, and it was there she discovered her power as queen of the underworld. In Jungian terms, the descent into grief awakens the archetype of the sovereign feminine, the woman who no longer waits for permission, who does not beg to be chosen because she has chosen herself. But before this power rises, the descent must be honored. Imagine her standing at the edge of that descent, torn between numbing the ache or daring to feel it. She lights another cigarette, pours another glass of wine, checks her reflection in the mirror as though beauty could shield her from the emptiness inside. Yet the ache remains, whispering at the edges of her silence. The grief she avoids does not dissolve. It grows roots, winding deeper into her chest until it becomes indistinguishable from her identity. How many women live decades in this prison, mistaking the shadow for their true self? You know this place, don't you? The moment when distraction no longer works, when even the noise of the world can't drown out the trembling inside. It feels unbearable, yet there is a secret hidden there. The body's shaking is not weakness. It is a signal, an ancient wisdom telling her that something sacred is asking to be born. Grief is not the end of her story. It is the threshold she must cross if she is to reclaim what was always hers. But crossing a threshold requires courage. She wonders, how do you surrender to something that feels like it will swallow you whole? How do you lean into pain without being consumed by it? The question lingers in the air like smoke, pressing against her skin, daring her to take the first step. What if the very doorway she fears is the one that leads to her deepest power? Grief is not a polite visitor. It storms the body, breaking through defenses she has spent years building. One moment she seems fine, smiling at work, nodding along to conversations, carrying groceries as if life were moving forward. The next, her throat tightens without warning, her eyes burn, her chest contracts as though invisible hands are pressing against her ribs. This is the body's truth. What was never allowed to be spoken finds its way out through muscle, breath, and bone. Trauma is not a ghost of the past. It is alive, pulsing, insisting on recognition in the present moment. When a woman avoids grief, she lives in fragments. Her voice trembles when she tries to say what she needs. Her laughter feels hollow, disconnected from her core. She becomes a master of masks, presenting strength while secretly carrying the weight of unfinished sorrow. Jung knew that the psyche cannot be tricked forever. What is exiled returns, often stronger, often darker, until it is acknowledged. The more she resists her grief, the more it shapes her from the shadows. Relationships falter, boundary blur, patterns repeat. And all the while, the unspoken cry of her soul asks, "When will you finally face me?" The feminine archetype is deeply bound to cycles of death and rebirth. In ancient traditions, women gathered to mourn together, to wail and let the body shake, trusting that grief was not something to be solved but to be lived through. In modern times, she is often left to mourn in silence, fearing judgment, fearing weakness. Yet suppression is what keeps her trapped. Real strength is not the absence of tears. It is the willingness to feel them fully. Each tear is an unspoken memory rising to the surface, carrying with it the possibility of release. Picture her standing before a mirror after a sleepless night. Her eyes are swollen, her hair unkempt, but something in her reflection feels raw and real. For once, she does not force herself to cover it up. She lets the exhaustion remain visible, a silent testament to her endurance. In this moment, she is closer to her sovereignty than she realizes, because sovereignty is not born from perfection. It is born from truth. The truth of how heavy her heart has been, the truth of how much she has carried, the truth of what she has lost. Heavy, isn't it? The grief she carries is not only her own, it is inherited. Generations of women before her swallowed their sorrow because there was no room for it to be expressed. Their bodies bore the silence, and that silence was passed down. She feels the weight of her mother's loneliness, her grandmother's sacrifices, the unspoken regrets of women who never allowed themselves to break. When she lets herself grieve, she is not only healing her own story, she is breaking a lineage of silence. She is giving voice to what has been suppressed for centuries. But grief is cunning. It does not leave easily. It tempts her with distraction, urging her to keep moving, to fill the void with noise, with love that does not satisfy, with achievements that never quiet the ache. Each distraction feels good for a moment, then dissolves, leaving her emptier than before. She begins to see the pattern. Grief is not an enemy to be outrun. It is a teacher that insists on stillness. The doorway will not open through avoidance. It opens only when she sits with the ache long enough to feel its message. In Jungian terms, this is the confrontation with the shadow. To sit with grief is to look into the mirror of the unconscious and see what she has feared most. That she is not in control, that pain is unavoidable, that life requires surrender. But within that surrender lies a paradoxical strength. When she stops fighting her grief, she stops being ruled by it. What once felt like a storm threatening to destroy her becomes a river, carrying her towards something she never expected: clarity, depth, and unshakable presence. So she faces a choice. Continue running, continue pretending, continue living half a life, or turn toward the very ache she fears, knowing it may unravel her illusions but also return her to herself. The question echoes in her chest as she takes a slow breath, her body trembling with the weight of it. If you dared to stop resisting and allowed yourself to fully feel your grief, what would finally be set free? When she finally lets herself sink into grief, something unexpected happens. The wave she feared would drown her carries her instead. At first, it feels like being swallowed whole, as if her ribs might break under the pressure of the sobs she can no longer contain. Her face presses into her hands, her body folds inward, and for a moment there is nothing but sound, raw, guttural, ancient. It is the cry of a child who was left alone in the dark, the cry of a woman abandoned after giving everything, the cry of generations who were never allowed to speak. This is not weakness. This is truth erupting through silence. The body remembers what the mind denies. Muscles that have been tight for years begin to shake, as if the tension stored there is finally being released. The chest softens, the breath deepens, the tears flow like rivers cutting through stone. She thought grief would destroy her, but instead it begins to carve space within her. Space for new breath, new vision, new power. This is how the psyche heals, through the willingness to feel what once felt unbearable. Jung called this individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating what was hidden. And grief, as unbearable as it seems, is a gatekeeper on this path. In this surrender, she begins to see with new eyes. The man who left was never the cause of her emptiness. He was only a mirror triggering the wound that was already there. The friendship that crumbled, the job that betrayed her, the rejection that stung, they are threads woven into a larger fabric. Beneath them all lies the deeper wound, the loss of self, the forgetting of her own worth, the silence that taught her not to trust her voice. Each grief is a fragment pointing her back to the core truth E has avoided. And now, as her tears fall, those fragments gather, slowly stitching themselves back into a whole. It is in this rawness that she encounters the archetype of the wounded maiden, the part of her that longed to be chosen, that gave away her power in hopes of love, that believed sovereignty was something bestowed by another. The maiden lives in dependency, in waiting, in believing she must earn what should never have been questioned, her inherent worth. But as grief strips away illusions, something shifts. She begins to sense the stirrings of another archetype rising, the queen, the sovereign feminine. The one who no longer waits to be chosen, because she remembers she has always been the chooser. This is not an easy transformation. The maiden weeps for what she has lost, and her sorrow is real. But the queen emerges from within that sorrow, not by erasing it, but by embodying it. Sovereignty is not the absence of pain. It is the ability to hold pain without being ruled by it. The woman who has grieved deeply is the woman who cannot be manipulated easily, for she has already survived the fire. She knows her own depths, and in knowing them, she discovers unshakable ground beneath her feet. Still, the path is not linear. Some days she feels the queen's steadiness, her spine tall, her voice clear, her choices unapologetic. Other days she slips back into the maiden's longing, wishing someone would rescue her from the weight of it all. This, too, is part of the work. Healing is a spiral, returning again and again to old wounds with new awareness, each time descending a little deeper, each time rising a little stronger. The descent into grief is not a single event but a rhythm, a dance between shadow and light. She begins to notice something else. The more she allows grief, the less it terrifies her. The tears that once felt like weakness now feel like cleansing. The silence that once felt suffocating now feels sacred. The body that once felt burdened now feels alive, buzzing with sensation, capable of holding both sorrow and joy. This is the alchemy of grief. It turns emptiness into depth, pain into power, loss into clarity. The doorway she feared is not a dead end. It is a passage into sovereignty. And yet, the question lingers like a whisper in the back of her mind. If grief can transform into power, what does it demand of her now? What must she release once and for all to fully step through the doorway and claim her sovereignty? To release is to risk, and this is where the confrontation deepens. She has learned to hold grief, to let it move through her, but now she faces the attachments that bind her to old pain. There are the letters she never threw away, the songs she cannot listen to without trembling, the memories she revisits at night like a ritual of self-punishment. These attachments feel like threads tying her to the past, yet in truth, they are chains keeping her from her sovereignty. Letting go does not mean forgetting. It means choosing life over the endless rehearsal of death. Her hands hover over the box of keepsakes. Photographs, notes, fragments of a love story that collapsed under its own weight. For years she kept them as evidence, as if they could explain why she was left behind. Now she sees them differently. They are not answers, they are anchors. Each object holds a piece of her energy frozen in time. To keep them is to remain entangled in a story that no longer exists. Her fingers tremble as she lowers the lid, her breath uneven, her chest tightening again. The maiden clings. The queen whispers release. Jung spoke of the necessity of death within the psyche. Old identities must die so that a fuller self may live. This is the underworld initiation every sovereign must pass through. Without it, power is only performance. With it, power becomes embodied. To grieve fully is to accept the death of illusions. She will never again be the woman who believes love is guaranteed if she gives enough. She will never again mistake silence for safety. She will never again confuse being chosen with being worthy. These illusions served her once, but now they suffocate. Their death is her rebirth. And yet the body resists. The chest constricts, the stomach knots, the throat closes as if the very act of release is a threat to survival. This is trauma's residue. The nervous system learned long ago that clinging was the only way to feel safe. To let go feels like death, even when it is the opposite, so she breathes. Slowly, deliberately, she places one hand on her chest, the other on her belly, grounding herself in the present. She whispers without words, "I am safe now. I can let go." And in that moment, the body loosens just enough for her to drop the chain she has carried. When the chain falls, grief surges one last time, fierce and consuming. She bends forward, sobbing into the palms of her hands, the floor beneath her wet with tears. But this time, the sobs feel different. They are the cries of being abandoned. They are the cries of release, of a spirit finally freed from captivity. The weight she carried begins to dissolve, and beneath it she feels something unfamiliar, lightness. The body remembers this too. Not everything is heaviness. There is also breath, space, possibility. In myth, this is the moment when the ashes give birth to fire. The descent has burned away what was false. The confrontation has stripped her bare. Now the ember of sovereignty begins to glow within her. It is subtle at first, a quiet knowing rather than a blazing declaration. But it is undeniable. She begins to stand taller, to breathe deeper, to speak with a tone that no longer apologizes. The woman who emerges from grief is not the same woman who entered it. She has been remade. Still, a question hums in her chest, refusing to be ignored. If she is no longer defined by loss, then who is she? If grief was the doorway, what lies on the other side? On the other side of grief, she discovers an unfamiliar landscape, quiet, vast, alive with possibilities she once thought were closed to her. At first, it feels unsettling. She is so accustomed to carrying heaviness that lightness feels foreign, almost dangerous. There is no constant ache dictating her every move, no desperate need to fill the silence. Instead, the silence feels different now, like fertile soil waiting to receive new seeds. The emptiness she once feared becomes spaciousness, and within that space, her sovereignty begins to take shape. She notices it in small moments. The way her shoulders no longer hunch when she speaks, as though bracing for rejection. The way she pauses before saying yes, giving herself time to ask if she truly desires what is being offered. The way she looks in the mirror, not searching for flaws, but meeting her own gaze with a steadiness that surprises her. These small shifts are not dramatic, but they are radical. Each one is a quiet act of reclamation. Each one says, "I belong to myself." In Jungian language, this is the movement from shadow into integration. She has faced the shadow of grief, walked through its corridors, and allowed it to shape her. Now the light of consciousness touches those places that were once hidden. She is no longer divided between the self she shows and the self she buries. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means nothing essential is exiled anymore. The queen within her does not deny sorrow, but she no longer confuses sorrow with weakness. Instead, she carries it with dignity, woven into her strength. The sovereignty that grief awakens is not loud. It does not need to prove itself. It is not about dominance or superiority. It is about presence. When she enters a room, people feel it. Not because she demands attention, but because she inhabits her body fully, her energy no longer leaking into old wounds or unhealed stories. Her grief has become her gravity, anchoring her in authenticity. No performance, no mask, no waiting to be validated. This is the paradox of feminine power. It emerges not from perfection, but from the raw honesty of what she has survived. And yet, sovereignty comes with responsibility. The queen archetype is not free from struggle, but she is free from self-abandonment. Every choice now asks her to stand in her own authority. Will she return to the comfort of old patterns, letting fear dictate her steps? Or will she honor the wisdom grief has given her and act from her truth, even when it costs her approval? This is the ongoing work, not just to taste sovereignty in rare moments, but to embody it in daily life. She remembers the night she sat with her grief, the way her body shook and her tears would not stop. That image returns, but now it carries a different meaning. It is not a memory of brokenness, but of initiation. That trembling woman was not collapsing. She was being remade. What felt like the end was the beginning of her sovereignty. And every time the ache whispers again, every time the shadow returns, she knows what to do. She no longer fears the descent. She understands that the doorway will open again and again, each time leading her deeper into herself. This is the cycle the feminine has always known: descent, death, rebirth, sovereignty. It is etched into the seasons, into the moon, into the body's own rhythms. What once felt like punishment now feels like participation in a larger truth. Grief is not a deviation from life. It is the pulse of life itself, reminding her that endings and beginnings are always intertwined. In learning to honor this rhythm, she has learned to honor herself. Still, one question remains, lingering like a threshold she has not yet stepped across. If grief has returned her to sovereignty, what new life is she now called to create with this power she carries? Creation begins quietly. At first, she notices a stirring inside her, a pull toward things she once dismissed as impractical or impossible. She wakes one morning and feels an urge to paint, even though she hasn't touched a brush since childhood. Another day she feels called to walk barefoot in the grass, to feel the earth's pulse beneath her feet. These impulses seem small, yet they are the first sparks of a new life. They are the signs that sovereignty is not abstract. It is embodied in the choices she makes, the desires she honors, the boundaries she keeps. She no longer asks permission to follow these impulses. That is the difference grief has made. In the past, she silenced herself, waiting for approval, fearing rejection. Now she feels the steadiness of her own authority. If she wants solitude, she claims it. If she desires connection, she initiates it. If something feels heavy or false, she walks away without apology. This is not rebellion for its own sake. It is alignment. It is the queen choosing what nurtures her soul rather than what numbs it. The more she embodies this, the more her relationships shift. Some people fall away, unsettled by her new clarity. Others draw closer, magnetized by the authenticity she radiates. There are no longer frantic efforts to be loved, no longer bargains made with her self-worth. She loves from fullness, not from lack. She gives because she chooses, not because she is desperate to be chosen. This is the sovereignty grief has given her: love without chains, connection without self-betrayal. And it is not just in love. She notices her voice in places where she once stayed silent. At work, she speaks her truth without softening it to make others comfortable. In friendships, she names what she needs instead of hoping someone will guess. Even with herself, she is honest, admitting when she is tired, when she is angry, when she is tender. This honesty is radical. It is the root of her power, because a sovereign woman does not hide from herself. She knows that her emotions, even the difficult ones, are not threats but guides. Jung said that wholeness is not achieved by cutting off parts of the self but by integrating them. She understands this now in her body. The grief she once feared has become part of her strength. The shadow no longer feels like an enemy but like a well of wisdom she can draw from. Every loss taught her something essential: how to endure, how to surrender, how to rise. These lessons are etched into her bones. They travel with her, not as chains but as jewels, shining proof of her resilience. And yet she knows this is not the end of the journey. Sovereignty is not a crown you wear once and forever. It is a practice, a devotion, a way of living each day with integrity. She will still face challenges. She will still feel grief again, but she will never again fear its presence because she has walked through its fire and found herself alive on the other side. This knowing is her power. This knowing is her freedom. She stands at the edge of her new life, looking out at horizons she could not see when she was buried in sorrow. Her chest feels open, her breath steady, her gaze unwavering. She understands now that grief was never meant to destroy her. It was meant to awaken her. It was the doorway through which she stepped into her own sovereignty. The only question left is the one she must answer for herself, again and again, with every choice she makes. Now that you have walked through the doorway of grief and claimed your sovereignty, what will you dare to create with the power that is finally yours?